Mesopotamia was one of the cradles of civilization 6,000 years ago, located in the fertile valley between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. It was the birthplace of current-day society and the first writing system. Every important city in Mesopotamia had a marvel showing the magnificence of their civilization. These marvels are known to us as ziggurats. My name is Kaylee and today we're going to look at, in my opinion, the most beautiful of all ziggurats in Mesopotamia, the Great Ziggurat of Ur. Way back in the day, around the birth of civilization 5,800 years ago, the coastal city of Ur was founded. The city is now known as Tel el-Mukayyar and is located in the modern-day city of Nasiriyah in the Dikar Governorate of southern Iraq. The very first mention of Ur in written history was in the 26th century BCE, with its first recorded king being Messanapada. Before the birth of civilization and before the creation of the very first city-states, the Sumerians worshipped their gods on top of mountains, as they were mountain deities. The Sumerians originally came from mountainous and hilly terrains. During the Ubaid period, they started to settle on the flat plains of Mesopotamia between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. As the Sumerian society evolved and created their very first cities, they found themselves at a loss as to how to worship their gods, as there were no mountains in the area. The solution to this problem was the creation of artificial hills, which we now understand to be ziggurats. A ziggurat is not like a pyramid, as a pyramid holds chambers and passages inside. A ziggurat is a solid mass and holds a place of worship on top. But what even is a ziggurat? I hear you think, what even is a ziggurat? As I explained in December in my Ziggurat of Uruk video, a ziggurat is a raised platform with 4 sloping sides and it looks somewhat like a chopped off pyramid. The materials used for the construction of a ziggurat are mud bricks. This was done because stone was rare in Mesopotamia, so it wasn't used much as a construction material. A ziggurat was the visual focal point of a city, and they had a symbolic meaning as well. The top of a ziggurat would house a temple to honor the gods and goddesses. The temple on top would have risen above the fortification wall, which could be seen from quite a distance. This is the main purpose of the ziggurat, to get the temple on top as close to the heavens as they possibly could construct it. Spotting the ziggurat in the distance would make the visual connection to the gods being honored, and their political authority would be recognized easier. Since the Sumerians lived in a theocratic society, the ziggurats would be at the heart of this political system, connecting heaven and earth. This is more evident by the names the Sumerians would give these temples and ziggurats: the House of the Mountain, the link between earth and heaven, the Holy Hill, and the House of the Mountain of all lands. We've learned in my deep dive about the Ziggurat of Uruk, which predates the Ziggurat of Ur by hundreds of years, that every Mesopotamian city had a patron deity. In Uruk we learned that the patron deity was the god Anu, which later got replaced by the goddess Inanna. Here in the city of Ur they had a different patron deity. The moon god Nanna was the protector of this city. The city was even literally named the Abode of Nanna. Around 2050 BCE, construction on the Great Ziggurat of Ur started, and at the latest it was completed at 1980 BCE. Just like with the Anu Ziggurat of Uruk, construction started on the bottom, with the mud bricks slowly making their way to the flat platform surface approximately 30 meters in height. The base of the ziggurat is 64 meters in length and 45 meters wide, and the corners of the base are oriented to the cardinal points of the compass. The massive raised platform was encased with a burnt mud brick facing. The first stage of the ziggurat was 9.75 meters in height. The second stage was 4 meters in height. The third and last stage, 2 meters and 50 centimeters in height, and on top there was a flat surface, and on this platform stood a small temple. The temple on this ziggurat was a shrine to the moon god Nanna. It is said that King Ur-Nammu had ordered the construction of the ziggurat during the 3rd dynasty of Ur, also known as the Neo-Sumerian Empire. But it's thought that under the rule of King Shulgi, the ziggurat was finished. Shulgi then proclaimed himself to be a god in order to win the allegiance of nearby cities. It was under King Shulgi's 48-year-long rule that the city of Ur became the capital of a state that controlled most of Mesopotamia. For a long time the ziggurat stood in all its glory, but we know that nothing truly lasts forever. so around 600 BCE there was not much left besides the base. The last king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, King Nabonidus, had come upon the ruins and decided to rebuild the ziggurat. But with nothing left to guide him, he restored the three-staged ziggurat in 7 stages, changing the original appearance. Nabonidus was the last king before the fall of Babylon to the First Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great, which means that the Great Ziggurat of Ur and the city of Ur, who once were at the height of the Mesopotamian state, were now slowly turning to ruins and eventually would be covered by the desert sand. The ziggurat was not the only great monument in the ancient city, although it was the largest. So let's take a look into the ancient city of Ur, which is sometimes referred to as Ur Kasdim or Ur of the Chaldeans. A long time ago, Ur was a coastal city, near the mouth of the Euphrates on the Persian Gulf, with water levels 2.5 meters higher than in modern times. Ur was thought to be surrounded by marshland with no necessary use for irrigation, which means the irrigation system that was discovered was most likely used for transportation. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of occupation before the founding of the city of Ur during the Ubaid period, somewhere between 6500 and 3800 BCE. During excavations of the city in 1920, they discovered the earliest levels of occupation under a sterile deposit of soil. Back then, this was interpreted by the archaeologists as evidence for the Great Flood in the biblical book of Genesis and the Epic of Gilgamesh. The South Mesopotamian plain was regularly exposed to floods from the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, and of course heavy erosion due to water and wind. Of course, these floods in the area may have contributed to the biblical Great Flood stories. If your surroundings are flooded and it's all you've ever known, it might actually seem that the world is enduring a worldwide Great Flood. New settlers came into the area from the east, what we now refer to as Sumerians, and Ur was founded approximately 5,800 years ago in 3800 BCE, and the first written record, as stated previously, was somewhere in 2600 BCE. Messanepada was listed as the first king for the first dynasty of Ur on the Sumerian king list. Messanepada was also described as the king of Kish, another ancient Sumerian city, and he overtook the city of Uruk by overthrowing King Lugar-Kitun during his 80-year-long rule. Around 3000 BCE, the Akkadians gained control over the Sumerians and much of Mesopotamia until their empire fell in 2200 BCE. Barbaric people from the Zagros Mountains, called the Gutians, then took over the northeast of Mesopotamia, while the Assyrians assured their independence in the rest of the area. Eventually, the third dynasty was established when King Ur-Nammu came into power somewhere around 2047 BCE. Under his rule, agriculture and irrigation were improved. He brought with him a code of laws known as the Code of Ur-Nammu. This code is the oldest known, dated by a document which was identified in Istanbul in 1952, and his code precedes the Code of Hammurabi by 300 years. After his death, he became deified and he continued on as a hero figure. A piece of surviving Sumerian literature tells the tale of Ur-Nammu's death and his journey to the underworld. After Ur-Nammu's death, his son King Shulgi reigned for approximately 48 years, and he is known as the greatest king of the third dynasty of Ur. He reformed the empire into a centralized bureaucratic state. He is thought to have completed the Great Ziggurat of Ur, and in his 23rd year of his rule, he deified himself to strengthen his claim to power. By the time of the rule of King Ur-Nammu in 2048 BCE, the city was apparently divided into neighborhoods. Artisans lived in another quarter than the merchants. There were open spaces for gatherings with wide and narrow streets, structures for city and empire management, structures for water resources, and flood control has been found evident as well. The materials used to build the houses in Ur was to no surprise mud bricks and mud plaster. In some of the larger, more important buildings, the walls, roofs and floor were strengthened with bitumen and reeds. During archaeological discoveries in the past, they found out that Ur was a major Sumero-Akkadian center in Mesopotamia. The discovery of the royal tombs has confirmed the splendor of the ancient city beyond a doubt. The royal tombs date from approximately the 25th century BCE, which falls into the early dynastic period in Mesopotamia. Within these tombs, they've discovered an immense treasure of luxurious items made from precious metals like gold and silver, and semi-precious stones such as lapis lazuli and carnelian. They were procured from quite a distance all over the Middle East, as far north as the Black Sea region and as far south as the Arabian Peninsula. This particular wealth was unparalleled up until then. It's a testimony of Ur's economic importance in the area. Archaeological studies in the region have discovered that Ur was a major port on the Persian Gulf and therefore controlled much of the trade in Mesopotamia. The city of Ur was surrounded by sloping walls 8 meters in height that were approximately 25 meters wide. Some buildings were bordered by a brick wall, while in other places buildings were partially integrated into the city wall. On the western side of the city, the fortifications of the wall were strengthened by the Euphrates River. Between 2030 and 1980 BCE, the city of Ur was estimated to have been the largest in the world, with a population of approximately 65,000. The Ur Empire continued until it fell to the Elamites around 1940 BCE, just like we have seen happen with the city of Uruk in my video about the Anu Ziggurat of Uruk. The city might have lost its political power after the fall of the Third Dynasty of Ur, but it never lost its important position providing access to the Persian Gulf, which ensured the city its ongoing importance during the second millennium BCE. Eventually, the city became ruled by the first dynasty of Babylon, but after the fall of Hammurabi's short-lived Babylonian Empire, the native Akkadians ruled over Ur for 270 years, until the Babylonians reconquered it in the 16th century BCE. After this, the city came under sporadic rule of the Elamites, the Middle Assyrian Empire, and the Neo-Assyrian Empire. From the end of the 7th century BCE, the city was ruled by the Chaldean dynasty of Babylon, with its most famous ruler, Nebuchadnezzar II. Under his rule, the city of Ur saw new constructions, which continued until the last Babylonian king Nabonidus improved the ziggurat. Unfortunately, the city began to decline around 530 BCE after Babylon fell to the Persian Achaemenid Empire, and from around 500 BCE, the city was no longer inhabited. Many theories surround the abandoning of the city. Possible reasons are thought to be drought or the changing of the Euphrates and/or Tigris river patterns. The city of Ur is not necessarily well known to the world for its ziggurat, but for a very different reason. The city is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as being the birthplace of Abraham, the patriarch of the Abrahamic religions including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Within the city is a structure which is 4,000 years old and known as the House of Abraham. It most likely served as an administrative center around the time Abraham would have lived here before he left for Canaan, according to the Bible. There has been speculation, of course, if the city of Ur is the actual place the Bible refers to when it mentions Ur Kasdim, but it seems like Pope Francis, head of the Catholic Church, believes it is. In March 2021, he traveled to the city of Ur to condemn violent religious extremism during a prayer service held in the city, where he prayed alongside Muslims, Yazidis, and Christians. This is the first ever visit of a pope from the Catholic Church to Iraq, which reinforces the message of interreligious tolerance in a country that is deeply divided by religion and ethnicity. We believers cannot be silent when terrorism abuses religion, he told the congregation, which included members of the religious minorities persecuted under the Islamic State's group's 3-year rule of much of northern Iraq. The Pope urged Iraq's Muslim and Christian religious leaders to put aside animosities and work together for peace and unity. The greatest blasphemy was the act of hating our brothers and sisters. Hostility, extremism, and violence are not born of a religious heart. They are betrayals of religion, he said. We believers cannot be silent when terrorism abuses religion. There is corruption, abuse of power, and that is not the way. At the same time, you need to think of justice, transparency, to strengthen certain values, and that is how credibility can grow so everyone, especially the young people, can have hope for the future. This is true religiosity, to worship God and to love our neighbor, he told the gathering. Pietro da Val, an Italian composer and author, traveled through the Holy Land and visited the city of Ur in 1625. During his visit, he recorded the presence of ancient bricks stamped with strange symbols cemented together with bitumen, as well as inscribed pieces of black marble that appeared to be seals. None of the European archaeologists identified Tel el-Mukayyar as the ancient city of Ur, until Henry Rawlinson successfully deciphered bricks from the city that were brought to England by William Loftus in 1849. In 1853 and 1854, the city saw its first excavations on behalf of the British Museum with instructions from the Foreign Office by John George Taylor, the British Vice-Consul at Basra. John George Taylor is credited with the uncovering of the Great Ziggurat of Ur. In the four corners on the platform, he discovered 4-cylinder seals bearing the inscriptions of Nabonidus, the last king of Babylon. He further excavated the area. Unfortunately, it was typical of the era, and his excavations destroyed much information and exposed the tell, which is a sort of mount structure. The 4,000-year-old bricks and tile now laid loose, ready for construction, but they wouldn't be moved for the next 75 years as the British Museum suddenly decided to prioritize archaeological research in Assyria. After the British Museum redirected their attention to Assyria and Taylor left, the site had many visiting travelers, and almost all of them found ancient Babylonian inscribed stones and other items just scattered around the surface, so it was deemed easy to explore since it was rich in ancient remains. Of course, no one knows how many of these remains were taken and are currently still unaccounted for. I mean, to be honest, if you inherited ancient Babylonian remains from your great-great-grandfather, would you go to a museum to return them and give them back? Or would you keep them to yourself, since the world has no idea they even exist? Eventually, in 1918, Reginald Campbell Thompson laid the groundworks for a short season of excavations under the lead of Henry Reginald Holland Hall, who worked for the British Museum in 1919 to lay the groundworks for more extensive excavations in the future. Thankfully, this time it didn't take 75 years before excavations were being carried out. The British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania funded a 12-year-long excavation campaign, which was led by archaeologist Sir Charles Leonard Woolley. During this campaign, the archaeologists have discovered 1,850 burials. Among these were 16 royal tombs, which contained incredible artifacts and objects. Among these artifacts, they found pieces of pottery, lyres, 5 probable complete games of Ur, and golden jewelry. One of these royal tombs held the Standard of Ur, which is an artifact from the 3rd millennium BCE. It's a wooden box measuring 49.53 centimeters long and 21.59 centimeters high. Dating from the first dynasty of Ur during the early dynastic period, approximately 4,600 years old. It's inlaid with a mosaic of shell, red limestone and lapis lazuli, and one side of the box depicts war and the other side depicts peace. No one knows the purpose of this artifact, but what we do know is that it was found next to the skeleton of a ritually sacrificed man in one of the largest of the royal tombs, tomb PG-779. This particular tomb is thought to belong to King Urpabilsach, who died around 2550 BCE. It was a unique find since almost everything from this tomb was looted once Sir Woolley arrived for excavations in 1927. Only one of the 16 royal tombs was unlooted when the excavations took place. This tomb is believed to have been of a queen. They discovered a cylinder seal inside with the name bearing Queen Puabi. They did find 2 other seals in the tomb, but both did not bear names. In this tomb, they discovered many human remains which were thought to have been buried with the queen in a form of human sacrifice. Next to the queen was a chest, and underneath this chest they found a hole in the ground which led to another tomb, PJ-789, which is called the King's Grave. In this tomb, they discovered the remains of 63 people equipped with copper helmets and swords. This is believed to be the king's personal army that were buried with him to escort the king safely to the afterlife. They discovered so many items in the royal tombs that the archaeologists at the end of the third excavation season were spending more time recording the objects than they were digging for new objects. The team excavated the soil underneath the royal cemetery as well. Underneath a 3.5 meter thick layer of clay, they discovered pottery and other remains that showed the existence of earlier habitation of the area. The pottery remains date from the Ubaid period. Eventually, in 1934, Woolley and his team of archaeologists finished the excavations at the Royal Cemetery of Ur. Near the ziggurat of Ur, the team discovered many buildings. Among these was the temple Enun Ma, a palace for King Ur-Nammu called Edupla-Ma, a residence for a high priestess called Egikpar, and a temple building named Ehursag. When the archaeologists were excavating certain parts of the palace and temple complex, they discovered dozens of artifacts neatly arranged side by side who were dated to be centuries apart. They seemed to be museum pieces as they discovered labels nearby, making them realize they discovered what is most likely the oldest museum on Earth. These labels came in the form of cylinder drums and had 3 languages on them. A fun thing to note about this team of archaeologists working at the site was that one of them was Max Mallowan. Now, you might have never heard of him, or maybe you have. When the excavations were being carried out, word got around about the discovery of an ancient city, so it attracted many visitors. One of these visitors was the famous writer Agatha Christie, who you most likely will have heard about. She met Max Mallowan on site in February 1930. He was 13 years younger than her, and she married Max only 7 months later in September 1930. She traveled with Max to his archaeological expeditions, and the long travels by train made her write the famous novel published in 1934, Murder on the Orient Express. Almost all treasures discovered at Ur are divided between the British Museum and the Penn Museum, also known as the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. For a long time, the items owned by the Penn Museum toured in an exhibition through 8 museums in the United States. This tour ended at the Detroit Institute of Art in May 2011. These items have been on display at the Penn Museum in the Iraqi's Ancient Past exhibition, which opened to visitors in May 2011. As you can imagine, in the desert-like area, the excavated remains have almost all been covered by sand over time. The only things sticking out above the sand are the partially reconstructed ziggurat, the famous royal tombs, and the Abraham's House Center, which is reconstructed as well. Saddam Hussein had ordered the facade of the lowest level and monumental staircase of the ziggurat to be rebuilt in the 1980s. The ziggurat unfortunately suffered damage during the Gulf War in 1991 because Saddam Hussein had cunningly placed his military base right next to the ziggurat, incorporating the structure in his military defense plan. He even placed his MiG fighter jets close to the ziggurat because he was convinced that the US bombers would spare them in fear of destroying the ancient structure. The ziggurat was damaged by explosions close by that shook the structure, and it was hit many times by small arms fire. You can still see 4 bomb craters near the ziggurat, and the walls of the structure have been pierced by more than 400 bullet holes. In 1999, tension ran high and Pope John Paul II was denied access to Ur by Saddam Hussein, which is why the visit of Pope Francis was so important. In the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the ziggurat survived the Battle of Nasiriyah between the Iraqi forces and the United States Army. Although the ziggurat and the city of Ur stood on the wasteland on the edge of a war zone for quite a long time, with the ruins of the ancient city completely abandoned. This did make it possible for the US soldiers based on the Talil Air Force Base near Nasiriyah to travel easily to the ruins, walk around, take photos and videos. Of course, the ziggurat had quite the gravitational pull on these soldiers, and they would often climb the stairs to the flat surface on top of the ziggurat, as you can see here. It was impossible for the soldiers not to step on ancient sherds of pottery as the ground is completely covered with it. During this hectic period of their lives, filled with dread and uncertainty about their lives and if they were able to make it to camp safely at night or if they were able to make it back home once their deployment ended, the visits to Ur were a breath of fresh air. The soldiers were able to walk around freely to wander in the calm of the empty ruins and enjoy a few rare moments of peace, as an officer in charge at the time wrote down in an article. Since 2008, the area has been under the supervision of curator Div Mohsen Naif Al-Ghizi, and in May 2009 the United States Army returned the Ur site to the Iraqi authorities, who now hope to develop it as a tourist destination, which I personally hope they will do soon. The Iraqi government opened the ziggurat for visitors in 2009, with festivities attended by the kindergarten students from the Mumsuna school in Nasiriyah. Since 2009, the Global Heritage Fund has been working to protect and preserve Ur against erosion, neglect, inappropriate restoration, war and conflict. Since 2013, the conservation and maintenance of the archaeological site of Ur was established by the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage of the Iraqi Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, and the Institution for the Development Cooperation of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They've created a high-resolution aerial map from more than 100 aerial photographs, as you can see here. I will leave a link to that in the comments down below. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, an absolute incredible monument that stood there in the desert in silence as witness to more than 4,000 years of human conflict, and all we can wonder is if it has seen it all, or if there's more to come. But with those last words, you've reached the end of this video. If you enjoyed watching, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you'd like to see more of these kind of videos, and click the bell icon if you want to be notified every time I upload. If you haven't seen my previous videos yet, then click the card in the upper right corner, the link in the description down below, or click the end cards in the end of this video. I'd also like to thank my patrons, Richard, Floyd, Scott, James and NGC6543. And with that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! The Great Ziggurat of Ur.